Jos was once one of the most loved cities in Nigeria. Cool weather, beautiful hills, rock formations, tourism, a place where people from different parts of the country came to live, work, study, and rest. Plateau State proudly called itself the home of peace and tourism. And for many Nigerians, that was not just a slogan. Human Rights Watch wrote that until September 2001, Jos was widely viewed as a peaceful city, and that people fleeing conflict elsewhere even came there for safety. But today, when many people hear Jos, they do not only think of peace. They think of crisis, religious tension, ethnic division, indigene settler conflict, farmer-herder violence, curfews, revenge attacks, displaced families, and a city still trying to recover its soul. So what happened to Jos? How did a city known for peace become a symbol of repeated conflict? What led to the violence? What impact has it had on Nigeria? And what can the country learn before more cities follow the same road? This is the story of Jos, once home of peace and tourism, now a city struggling with continued conflict. Jos is not like many Nigerian cities. The weather is cooler, the landscape is dramatic, the hills make it feel different, the history is layered. Jos grew partly because of tin mining. During the colonial period, the plateau became important for mining, trade, and administration. People came from different places to work, trade, and settle. That diversity became one of Jos's strengths. You had Berom, Anaguta, Afizere, and other plateau communities. You had Hausa and Fulani communities. You had Igbo, Yoruba, Urhobo, and many other Nigerians who found a home there. Jos became a meeting point, a city of many languages, many faiths, many markets, many memories. But diversity can either become strength or tension depending on how it is managed. And in Jos, the management of diversity began to fail. At the heart of the Jos crisis is one of Nigeria's most dangerous political ideas: indigene versus settler. In many parts of Nigeria, your rights are not only determined by where you were born or where you live. They can also be determined by whether the state recognizes you as an indigene. That affects jobs, scholarships, political appointments, traditional recognition, land access, local government power, even emotional belonging. In Jos, this became explosive. Some groups saw themselves as the original owners of the land. Others had lived there for generations, but were still treated as settlers. Human Rights Watch identified indigeneship as central to many Nigerian communal disputes, where groups considered first inhabitants are pitted against those labeled settlers. A US diplomatic cable published by WikiLeaks also described Plateau's crisis as more complicated than simple ethno-religious violence, tracing it to power struggles between indigenes and settlers. The same cable noted that Hausa/Fulani communities had been present in Plateau for at least 200 years, even though some local narratives describe them as recent arrivals. That is where the danger begins. When people who have lived in a place for generations still feel they do not fully belong, anger grows. And when those who see themselves as original owners feel politically threatened, fear grows. In Jos, anger and fear eventually met. The major turning point came in September 2001. According to Human Rights Watch, Jos experienced massive violence in September 2001, with around 1,000 people killed. HRW also reported that between September 2001 and May 2004, between 2,000 and 3,000 people were killed in Plateau State based on its research. One of the sparks was a political appointment connected to a poverty eradication program. A U.S. diplomatic cable stated that the 2001 conflict began over the appointment of a person viewed as a settler to serve as state coordinator of a government-funded poverty eradication program. Now, on the surface, that sounds small, one appointment. But in a divided society, a small appointment can represent something much bigger. Who controls power? Who gets recognition? Who belongs? Who is being pushed out? Who is being favored? Who is being denied? That is how a political appointment became a symbol of deeper fear. And once violence began, it became harder to control. Many people describe the Jos crisis as Christian versus Muslim, and yes, religion became part of the violence. But if we stop there, we miss the deeper story. Jos is not only about religion, it is about land. It is about political power. It is about identity. It is about local government control. It is about who gets jobs. It is about who is called indigene and who is called settler. Religion became the language of the conflict, but power was the engine behind much of it. That is why two neighbors who once traded together could suddenly see each other as enemies. Once politics teaches people to fear one another, religion and ethnicity can become weapons. Over time, the conflict moved beyond the city. Violence spread to rural communities across Plateau State. Farmer-herder tensions became more intense. Communities accused one another of attacks, revenge, land grabbing, and failure to protect lives. In December 2023, AP reported that at least 140 people were killed in attacks on remote villages in Plateau State, in violence linked to the wider farmer-herder crisis. And as recently as March 2026, AP reported a night attack in Gariawe community in Jos North, where a resident said 20 people were confirmed dead and the Plateau State government imposed a 48-hour curfew. AP also described such attacks as part of a long-running cycle of violence in north-central Nigeria involving land and grazing disputes, farmer-herder tensions, and criminal gangs. That is why the title says continued conflict. This is not only history, it is still a living wound. The impact on Jos has been heavy. Tourism suffered, businesses closed, communities became segregated, people stopped crossing into certain neighborhoods, schools were disrupted, families were displaced, land became contested, trust collapsed, and perhaps the saddest impact is psychological. A city once known for peace became a place where people had to ask, is it safe to go there? For Nigeria, Jos became a warning that identity politics can destroy beautiful places, a warning that unresolved local grievances can become national security problems, a warning that if justice is delayed, revenge will keep replacing peace. Now, let's talk about classified and unclassified reports. We should be careful here. There are security reports that the public may never see fully. There are internal government files, intelligence assessments, and commission findings that may not be completely available to ordinary citizens, but the public record already tells us a lot. Human Rights Watch documented the 2001 Jos crisis and later Plateau violence. International Crisis Group also described the Jos crisis as rooted in recurring settler-indigene tensions and warned that unless addressed, violence would continue to fuel intercommunal strife. There are also Plateau State Judicial Commission reports and white papers. Some of these documents point to preventable warning signs, political manipulation, and failure to act early. Then there are diplomatic cables, including the US cable published by WikiLeaks, which argued that Plateau's communal crises were more complicated than mere ethno-religious violence and were deeply connected to indigene settler power struggles. So the message from public, unclassified and leaked diplomatic records is clear. Jos did not explode because people suddenly hated each other. The crisis grew from unresolved identity questions, political competition, land pressure, weak justice, and repeated failure to stop violence early. Nigeria has held many peace meetings. Religious leaders have spoken, traditional rulers have appealed, government has set up commissions, security agencies have been deployed, curfews have been announced, but the violence keeps returning. Why? Because peace meetings often treat symptoms, not causes. If people are killed and nobody is punished, peace will be weak. If displaced people cannot return safely, peace will be weak. If one group feels excluded from local power, peace will be weak. If farmers and herders do not have clear systems for land, water, and grazing, peace will be weak. If politicians benefit from division, peace will be weak. You cannot build peace only with speeches. Peace needs justice. So, what can Nigeria learn from Jos? First, the indigenous settler system must be reformed. A Nigerian should not live in a place for generations and still feel like a stranger. Second, justice must be real. People who organize or carry out violence must be investigated, prosecuted, and punished. Without accountability, revenge becomes the court of the poor and angry. Third, land and grazing disputes must be managed before they become massacres. That means clear land records, conflict mediation, ranching policy, water access, compensation systems, and early warning mechanisms. Fourth, peace building must include young people. Many conflicts are fought by young men who feel used, unemployed, and angry. Give them skills, jobs, and purpose, and you reduce the pool of violence. Fifth, political leaders must stop using identity as a weapon. A careless speech can burn what took generations to build. Sixth, security response must be early and trusted. Communities often know when danger is coming, but they will only report if they trust the system. And seventh, Jos must reclaim its story. It cannot only be remembered as a city of conflict. It must become again what it once represented: beauty, diversity, cool weather, hospitality, and peace. Jos was once the place people ran to for peace. Now, too often, it is the place people run from when violence begins. But the story of Jos is not finished. A city can be wounded and still heal, but healing will not come by pretending the wounds are not there. Jos needs justice. Jos needs honest history. Jos needs political courage. Jos needs land reform. Jos needs youth opportunity. Jos needs leaders who build bridges instead of counting votes through division. And Nigeria needs to learn from Jos. Because if a place once called the home of peace and tourism can become a city of repeated conflict, then no Nigerian city should take peace for granted. Peace is not a slogan. Peace is work.